My name is Evelyn Hart. I was 34 years old in Manchester, 2021, when my world fell apart. I thought I had the perfect family, my husband, Richard Hale, and our daughter, Amelia. But one night, their whispers and lies erased me from their lives as if I never existed. They rewrote my place in our home, in her heart, and in his arms. For 5 years, I lived as a ghost, watching from a distance. And then her wedding came. I walked in. The chandeliers trembled, the music froze, and when Richard saw me, he shook. Would you have walked into that wedding, or stayed hidden forever in silence? I remember the last night I lived in that house as Evelyn, the wife and the mother. The dinner table was set, candles flickered, and Amelia's laughter rang like music. She was only 18 then, full of dreams, talking about universities and dresses. Richard sat across from me, pretending to be a loving father, but his eyes avoided mine. That evening, I caught fragments of their words when I walked past Amelia's room. She doesn't need to know. She'll only hold you back. It's better if she leaves. Richard's voice, low but firm, struck me like a dagger. Amelia's reply was a whisper. I understand, Dad. I froze. My husband and daughter were plotting my erasure. When I confronted Richard, he dismissed it as nonsense. But then I found the papers, legal documents with my name erased from our finances, Amelia's guardianship altered, and even the house deed shifting into his name alone. My whole existence was reduced to ink and signatures. The betrayal cut deeper because Amelia, my daughter, my baby, looked me in the eyes and said, "It's better this way, Mom. You never understood us." That was the night I left. No luggage, no farewell, just the heavy silence of betrayal wrapping around me like chains. 5 years passed. I lived in a quiet flat in Leeds, working long hours at a modest bookstore owned by an old friend, Margaret Doyle. She never asked about my past, only offered me tea and kindness when I couldn't sleep. Those years stripped me bare, but they also hardened me. I became a shadow of Evelyn the wife, but a stronger woman in her own right. Then one rainy morning, as I stocked shelves, Margaret handed me a glossy invitation. It wasn't hers. It was addressed to me. My daughter Amelia was getting married in London. The card glowed with golden letters, the union of Amelia Hale and Jonathan Pierce. For a long time, I stared at that invitation. My hands trembled, my chest tightened. 5 years of silence, erased memories, and invisible wounds all roared inside me. Richard had stolen my family, Amelia had chosen him over me, and yet here was their invitation. Was it guilt, pity, or a cruel reminder that I was nothing more than a ghost? Margaret's hand rested on mine. You don't have to go, Evelyn. Sometimes the past belongs buried. But that night, as I sat alone in my flat, staring at my reflection, I realized something. I wasn't a ghost. I was still Evelyn Hart. And ghosts don't walk into weddings, but mothers do. So I chose. I packed the same small handbag I had walked away with 5 years ago. The weight was lighter now, not because the pain had gone, but because the anger carried me. When I stepped into that grand London hall, crystal chandeliers above, violins playing, Amelia radiant in her gown, Richard by her side, the air cracked. Gasps spread like wildfire as I walked down the aisle. And when Richard's eyes locked on me, his hands shook, his glass slipped, and the mask he had worn for years shattered. I was no longer erased. I was the storm they thought they had escaped. The silence inside that wedding hall was suffocating. For a moment, the music stopped, the chatter died, and every guest's gaze darted between Amelia, Richard, and me. I stood at the back of the aisle, my heart pounding but my face steady. Amelia's veil shimmered under the golden lights, but when her eyes landed on me, the sparkle drained. She looked at me as if she'd seen a ghost. My daughter, who once clung to me in thunderstorms, who shared secrets under blankets, now stared at me with something closer to fear than love. Richard, however, was the first to react. His jaw tightened, his skin paled, and he whispered to the groomsman beside him. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew that look. It was the look of a man whose carefully constructed world was crumbling in seconds. I walked forward, each step deliberate. Whispers rippled through the guests like wind through leaves. Isn't that? Who is she? Why does she look like the bride? They didn't know me, but they would. At At the front, the officiant hesitated, unsure whether to continue. Amelia's fiancé, Jonathan Pierce, turned to Richard for answers. His brow furrowed, confusion flickering across his face. "Amelia," I finally said, my voice steady but loud enough for the hall to hear, "I am your mother, and I will not be erased again." Gasps filled the air. Jonathan's head snapped toward Amelia. "Your mother?" His voice trembled with disbelief. Amelia's lips parted, but no words came out. Instead, Richard stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Enough, Evelyn. You are not welcome here. Leave before you embarrass yourself further." Embarrass myself. The irony of that statement nearly made me laugh. He, the man who signed me out of my own life, now dared to shame me for reclaiming it. I looked directly at Jonathan, the groom. His confusion was raw, unfiltered. "You deserve to know the truth before you say your vows," I told him. "Your bride and her father buried me alive, legally, emotionally, financially. They rewrote my place in her life as if I had never existed." Murmurs spread like wildfire. Guests leaned closer, whispers buzzing louder than the orchestra that had gone silent. Jonathan's mother, seated in the front row, gasped and clutched her pearls. Amelia finally found her voice. "You left us," she cried, though her voice cracked with uncertainty. "You abandoned me when I needed you most." "No, Amelia," I said firmly, my eyes burning but my tears contained. "I was forced out. The night your father whispered to you that I was a burden, the night you signed away your trust in me, that was the night you both chose to erase me. I didn't walk away. I was pushed." Jonathan turned slowly to Amelia. "Is this true?" His question hung heavy in the air, but Amelia couldn't answer. Her silence screamed louder than any denial. Richard's mask slipped entirely then. His face reddened, his hands shook, and his voice cracked with anger. "Evelyn, stop this madness. You have no proof." I reached into my small handbag, the same one I had carried the night I left 5 years ago. From it, I pulled a folded stack of yellowing documents, creased with age but damning nonetheless. I raised them high. "These are the papers you signed, Richard. The ones that stripped me of every right as Amelia's mother. You forged my signature, you manipulated her trust. And you buried me in silence." The guests gasped again, louder this time. Jonathan's eyes widened, and Amelia stumbled backward as if the weight of those words pressed down on her gown. The officiant quietly stepped away from the altar, unwilling to stand in the middle of the storm. Jonathan's voice, sharper now, cut through the chaos. "Amelia, is this the kind of truth you've been hiding from me? That you erased your own mother?" Amelia trembled. Her lips quivered, and though she tried to speak, all that came out was a choked sob. Richard grabbed her arm protectively, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an exit. But there was none, not anymore. I took a deep breath, my voice rising above the whispers and gasps. "You thought I was gone forever, but you were wrong. I am still here. And today, in front of every soul in this hall, I reclaim my place, not as a ghost, not as an erased name, but as a mother who refuses to vanish." The hall erupted in chaos. Jonathan stepped away from Amelia, his faith in her shaken. Richard clenched his fists, his body rigid with fury. Amelia broke into sobs, her perfect bridal makeup streaking down her face. And I stood tall, no longer invisible. The storm I had carried inside me for 5 long years had finally broken free. The chaos inside the wedding hall only grew louder. Guests whispered, some even stood to leave, while others stayed glued to their seats, unwilling to miss what was unfolding. The bride's tears, the groom's fury, and my defiance had turned what should have been a grand celebration into a storm of truth. Richard stepped forward, his voice rising like a whip. "Security, get her out of here." 2 men in black suits began to move toward me. For a brief second, I felt the same chill I had 5 years ago, the night Richard forced me to walk away with nothing. But this time, I planted my feet firmly on the ground. "No," I said, loud and unshaken. "I'm not leaving until the truth is fully told." Jonathan raised his hand, stopping the guards. His face was pale, but his voice steady. "Let her speak." Richard froze, glaring at Jonathan. But Jonathan's authority in that hall was undeniable. His family was wealthy, powerful, and this was his wedding. Richard's grip on the situation was slipping fast. I unfolded the old documents in my hand, the papers that had been my silent companions for half a decade. "These signatures," I said, holding them high, "are not mine. They're forged. I was forced out of my marriage, my motherhood, my home. And the man who did this is standing right there." Richard's face twisted. "Lies, she's mentally unstable. That's why she left us." Gasps spread across the room, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I turned to Amelia, who sat trembling in her white gown. "Amelia, you were old enough to know the truth. You saw what your father did. You heard him tell me I was nothing but a burden, and yet you let him rewrite me out of your life. Why?" Her lips trembled, and for the first time that night she spoke clearly. "Because he said, you never loved me." My chest tightened. The words pierced deeper than any blade. "Amelia," I whispered, "you were my world. Every sleepless night, every scraped knee, every lullaby, I lived for you. But your father poisoned your heart against me." Jonathan stepped closer to Amelia, his eyes searching hers. "Did you know she was alive all this time? Did you know what he did?" Amelia's sobs broke into words. I thought she abandoned me. Dad told me she ran off with someone else. He told me she didn't care." Her voice cracked, the illusion shattering in real time. The guests erupted in shock. Some gasped, some muttered prayers under their breath. Richard's lies, his carefully woven web, was unraveling thread by thread. Jonathan's mother rose from her seat, her voice trembling but resolute. "Mr. Hale, you brought this shame into our family. You invited us here under false pretenses. How dare you hide such a truth?" Richard's face darkened. He grabbed Amelia's arm, trying to pull her back toward him. "You don't need her. She's nothing. I raised you. I gave you everything." But Amelia yanked her arm free, her voice breaking with years of pent-up confusion. "You gave me lies, Dad." For the first time, Richard faltered. His control was slipping, not just over me, but over Amelia too. Jonathan stepped between Amelia and her father. His jaw was tight, his voice filled with disgust. "If you've lied about this, what else have you lied about? Do you think this marriage can go forward while this truth hangs over us?" The entire hall was waiting, every eye locked on Amelia, every breath held. She looked at me, her tears blurring her vision, and then at Jonathan, who waited for her answer. Richard tried one last time, his voice desperate. "Amelia, don't let her ruin your life. She's only here for revenge." I stepped closer, my voice low but powerful. "No, Richard, I'm here for justice." For a long moment, Amelia was silent. Then, slowly, she turned to Jonathan. "I need to know the full truth, right now. If this marriage is to mean anything, I can't live in his lies anymore." Jonathan nodded, his eyes still burning with anger. "Then we'll bring the truth out, even if it means tearing down everything your father built." The room fell silent again, but this silence was different. Heavy, expectant, like the pause before a thunderclap. Richard's mask had cracked. His lies had been exposed. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning, because men like Richard never surrender quietly. And I was ready. The autumn air in Devonshire, England, carried a crisp chill, but for Margaret Hayes, it felt warmer than any season she had known in years. She had rebuilt herself slowly, piece by piece, like a broken vase glued back together, scars still visible but stronger than before. Teaching art workshops at the community center had given her purpose. People began to see her not as the woman who vanished, but as the woman who endured. Yet, one evening in October 2022, her carefully constructed peace was disrupted. Margaret opened her mailbox outside the quaint stone cottage she now called home. Among the usual bills and letters was an envelope, so elegant it stood out instantly, ivory paper embossed with golden vines. Her breath caught as she read the name written in looping cursive. "Eleanor and Charles invite you to the wedding of Charlotte Hayes." Her hands trembled. The words blurred, but her eyes fixed on the name that pierced her like glass, Charlotte Hayes, her daughter. 5 years had passed since Margaret last saw Charlotte's face. 5 years of silence, of unanswered letters, of wondering whether her child remembered her. And now, this, an invitation to her own daughter's wedding. Margaret pressed the envelope to her chest, torn between disbelief and an aching flood of emotions. Who had sent it? Surely not Charlotte. Certainly not Henry, the husband who had betrayed her so completely. No, it must have been someone who still believed she had the right to know. She almost ripped the invitation to shreds, the pain too raw, too sharp. But something inside her stopped her hand. Instead, she carefully opened it and read. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Charlotte Hayes and William Davenport at the Davenport Estate, Oxfordshire, on the 12th of December, 2022. Her daughter was marrying into one of the most influential families in England. The Davenports were synonymous with wealth, tradition, and power. Margaret remembered reading about them in the news. William was the heir to a vast investment empire, groomed since birth for leadership. Her first instinct was to decline, to hide, to protect herself from being humiliated again. After all, what role could she possibly play in Charlotte's life now? She was the ghost, the erased mother, the woman who had been replaced. But a quieter voice whispered, "This is your chance." Not a chance for revenge, not even for recognition, but a chance to stand tall, to look her daughter in the eyes and remind her, "I exist. I am your mother." That night, Margaret sat by the fireplace, staring at the flames dancing in silence. She thought of Charlotte as a child, chasing butterflies in the meadow, her laughter ringing like bells. She thought of the bedtime stories, the drawings they painted together, the promises whispered in the dark. "I'll always be here for you." Somewhere inside, she believed Charlotte still remembered those moments. The connection between a mother and daughter could be buried, but not destroyed. When December arrived, Margaret packed a simple but elegant dress in navy blue silk, modest yet dignified. She wasn't going to outshine anyone. She wasn't going to cause a scene. She was simply going to show up in the most powerful way possible with her presence. The day of the wedding, as she traveled toward Oxfordshire, her heart pounded like a drum. The Davenport estate loomed in the distance, a breathtaking mansion surrounded by snow-dusted gardens. Guests in tailored suits and glittering gowns arrived in sleek cars, their laughter floating in the crisp winter air. Margaret clutched her invitation tightly, every step heavy with fear and hope. She had no idea what awaited her beyond those doors, rejection, anger, or perhaps the faintest spark of recognition. But she knew one thing for certain. For the first time in years, she would not be invisible. The grand hall of the Davenport estate shimmered with light. Chandeliers spilled golden fire across polished marble floors, while a string quartet played softly in the corner. Guests murmured, laughter echoing, crystal glasses clinking. It was the picture of elegance, but to Margaret Hayes, it was a battlefield. She stood at the edge of the entrance, invisible among the swirl of gowns and tailored suits. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and for a moment, she considered fleeing. What if Charlotte looked at her and saw only betrayal? What if Henry, the man who had once been her world, humiliated her all over again? But Margaret had not endured 5 years of silence to run now. She took a breath, straightened her navy blue silk dress, and stepped inside. Whispers followed her. Guests glanced her way, puzzled at the unfamiliar face, her poise, her quiet strength. She clutched the small clutch in her hands, grounding herself as her eyes swept across the room. And then she saw her. Charlotte Hayes. Her daughter stood at the far end of the hall in a gown of ivory lace, her golden hair swept into a regal bun, diamonds catching the light at her throat. She looked breathtaking, a young woman on the cusp of a new life. For a moment, Margaret's breath caught, not in pain, but in awe. My little girl has grown up. But Charlotte wasn't alone. At her side was Henry. Age had touched him, faint lines around his eyes, hair dusted with gray, but his presence was unchanged. Confident, charming, the perfect host. He leaned in close to whisper something to their daughter, making her laugh, and the sound pierced Margaret's heart like a blade. Tears burned her eyes, but she held them back. She had promised herself she would not break. Not here, not now. The ceremony began. Guests took their seats, and Margaret slipped quietly into a chair near the back, unseen, unnoticed. She listened as vows were spoken, rings exchanged, promises made. Every word echoed the promises she had once believed in, promises that had been shattered when her husband and child had erased her from their world. And yet, beneath the ache, there was pride. Pride in Charlotte's poise, in her courage, in the life she was building. When the final applause rang out, Margaret rose. This was her moment, the one she had feared, the one she had longed for. As the crowd shifted toward the reception hall, she stepped forward, her heels striking against the marble floor like a drumbeat. Gasps rippled through the guests, heads turned, eyes widened. Henry froze. For the first time in 5 years, his gaze locked with hers. His confident mask faltered, his glass nearly slipping from his hand. The color drained from his face. "Margaret," he whispered, the name falling from his lips like a ghost come to life. Charlotte turned at the sound. Confusion flickered in her eyes as she looked from her father to the stranger before her. Her brows furrowed, lips parting as recognition slowly, painfully dawned. "Mum." The single word shattered the hall's perfect silence. Guests exchanged shocked glances. The quartet stopped playing mid-note. Henry's jaw tightened, his hand reaching instinctively for Charlotte's arm as though to shield her. Margaret's voice trembled, but her eyes held steady as she answered. "Yes, Charlotte, it's me." The moment stretched like eternity. Henry tried to speak, to twist the narrative as he always had. "This isn't the time." But Charlotte pulled her arm free, her gaze locked on the woman she had been told to forget, the woman she had longed for in secret memories. And in that instant, the walls Henry had built began to crumble. The silence inside the Davenport estate was heavy, suffocating. Every eye in the hall remained fixed on the woman who had just returned from the shadows of the past. Margaret Hayes stood tall, though her heart thundered inside her chest. Her daughter's voice, trembling, disbelieving, still echoed in her ears. "Mum." Charlotte's lips quivered, her eyes wide, shining with tears. 5 years of absence, 5 years of unanswered questions, collided in that single word. Henry stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the marble. His expression was carefully arranged, a mask of control, but Margaret could see the panic in his eyes. "This is a mistake," he said quickly, his voice clipped. "Charlotte, darling, she doesn't belong here. She left us. She abandoned us." Margaret flinched. She had known he would twist the truth. He always had. But Charlotte didn't move. She didn't pull away. She simply stared between them, torn, searching for answers. Margaret drew in a shaky breath. "No, I never abandoned you, Charlotte. I was pushed away. Your father made sure of that." Gasps rippled through the hall. Guests exchanged bewildered glances, the atmosphere turning electric. Henry's jaw tightened. "Enough!" His tone was low, commanding, the same tone that had once silenced Margaret into submission. "This is my daughter's wedding, and I won't let you ruin it." But Margaret refused to back down. Not anymore. "You told her I was gone," she said, her voice breaking. "You told her I didn't care. But the truth is, Henry, you took everything from me, my home, my child, my dignity. And you lied to cover your tracks." Charlotte pressed a hand to her chest, her face pale. "Dad, is that true?" Henry hesitated, just for a moment, but it was enough. His silence spoke louder than any denial. The guests murmured louder now, whispers filling the hall like wildfire. Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she took a step closer to her daughter. "I never stopped loving you, Charlotte. Not a day passed that I didn't ache to hold you, to hear your voice. I wrote letters Henry never gave you. I waited for visits that never came. You were my world." Charlotte's breath hitched, her hands trembling. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked the question that would shatter everything. "Dad, why?" Henry's face flushed crimson. "I did what was necessary," he snapped. "She was weak, Charlotte. She couldn't give you the life you deserved. I made sure you had everything. Wealth, security, a future, everything she couldn't provide." Margaret's voice rose, fierce now, unshaken. "You gave her diamonds, Henry, but you stole her mother. You gave her a mansion, but you took her home. You gave her comfort, but you robbed her of love." The hall erupted, some guests gasping, others shaking their heads, whispers turning into outrage. Charlotte's tears finally spilled. She turned to Henry, her voice trembling with fury. "You let me believe she abandoned me. You let me hate her while she was out there, suffering alone. How could you?" Henry's mouth opened, but no words came. His carefully constructed world was unraveling before his very eyes. Charlotte moved. Slowly, firmly, she walked past him, her wedding gown trailing like a river of white, and stood before Margaret. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then, with trembling arms, Charlotte embraced her mother. The hall fell silent again, but this silence was different, heavy with emotion, charged with truth. Margaret clung to her daughter, her tears dampening the lace of the gown. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here now, and I'll never let go again." Henry stood frozen, glass still in hand, powerless for the first time in his life. The vows of the wedding had been spoken hours before, but tonight, another vow was made. One unspoken, yet stronger than any promise sealed in gold. The vow of a mother and daughter, reunited at last.